All right, how's it going, y'all? Today we're going over how to install TrueNAS Scale on this server right here from 45 drives. And we're going to be going over an entire guide here. This is one of my videos in my series on the complete guide to TrueNAS Scale. So there'll be a playlist down in the description below. But today we're going over basically installing it on your own hardware, as well as just doing the very basic first time configuration stuff. So essentially you've already got the hardware, you got that in the previous video. And then we are going to be going in, setting up TrueNAS Scale, and setting up things like your RAID Z volume and also your overall users and groups and just very basic SMB settings. In the future, we're going to go over a lot more in depth on optimizations and things like that. But at the end of this, you'll have a fully functioning TrueNAS server. So the first thing you need to go ahead and do is download TrueNAS Scale. That should not be too much of a surprise. Come in and go ahead, and it's also being called TrueNAS Community Edition now. And you come in right here and you can either download 2510 or 2504. We're going to be doing 2510, which is known as Golai. Then from there, once you've got it downloaded, you either need to use something like Blanca Etcher to flash it to a USB drive, or we can go in, and what I'm going to do here is this server actually has what's called IPMI. So I can actually just attach it as an image and use it directly like that. So that's actually what I'm going to be doing here. But if you don't know how to, Google how to create bootable media on whatever you've got. And then we're going to need to boot into this guy and set it on up. So I'm actually doing this on the ASRock rack, which is the IPMI interface for this 45 home lab server. And the nice thing about IPMI is you can just hit browse file and upload your media. And so what this does is this basically just makes it so that you don't have to burn a flash drive or anything like that. And then we're going to go ahead and boot it. So we're going to tap F11 to get into the boot media, so I can choose what to boot into. And then right here, it's going to show up as this virtual CD-ROM. Here it may be a real CD-ROM or a USB drive, whatever you're doing. We're going to just choose to boot into that TrueNAS Scale boot media. And now we're just going to choose Start TrueNAS Scale Installation. And so you'll notice that thankfully they do load the entire file system directly into RAM, which is what's going on right now. Basically, it is streaming a virtual disk over, in this case, Wi-Fi, just because I'm not plugged in over Ethernet, through a web browser. So we're getting very slow speeds. But after that, it'll all be in RAM, and so that performance will no longer matter. All right. Now we are totally in there. We can just go ahead and select one, install upgrade. You will now select which drive you want to install the actual operating system on. You can choose 2 or more for redundancy, but it's not that big of a deal to not have redundancy in this. It's really, if there is a crazy thing that happens, the backups are very small and easy to rebuild from, but it's just really how downtime sensitive this deployment is going to be. Then there's a new option here. How do we want to authenticate? We're going to go ahead and create a administrative user here, TrueNAS_admin, and you're going to create a password for it. You no longer use the built-in root account for this. And this password is what's going to be kind of that first time admin password that you use to log in. And now it's just going to install the entirety of TrueNAS Scale to that drive that is our main operating system drive. So we'll just wait until that's done. All right, so now one install duration later, we are finally ready. The only thing you may need to do is, if you've not already, make sure that whatever drive you're install the operating system to is the default boot drive. So that way, when this powers up, it should automatically hook up there. We're going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to stop the media and hit reboot system. And if everything works properly, this should boot straight into TrueNAS Scale. And just like that, we can see everything's good, and it's just auto going to boot into TrueNAS Scale. So now, in all reality, we no longer need to have a monitor hooked up to the system or use this IPMI. The only thing that is going to be useful for is it should pop in and actually show us what the IP address is here, and it can be useful for some settings, some interfaces, and things like that. And so we'll just leave it running here. But if you know how to look up an IP address on your router, you should just be able to get into it directly from here. All right, and so just like that, We can see it has successfully booted, and it is currently informing us of the IP address that you can get to the web management interface on. If you are somebody who this is a static only network, there's no DHCP, or it just chose the wrong interface, this interface, by hitting 1, we can see it says configure network interfaces, allows you to set whatever you need to set and change over the actual devices. So if you need to do that, that's where you would do it. But for everybody else, we're just going to go ahead and connect to that IP address, which for me is 10.30.1.34. And here you should end up at a nice TrueNAS web interface screen. And we're going to log in with that TrueNAS_admin username and password that you just set up. And now we're in. We can go ahead and start configuring all of our things. The first thing you need to do is come in on the left-hand side here and set up a storage pool. Go ahead and give it a name. I always do HG01. And because I test out a lot of things, my drives actually already have data on them. But you'd select if you want hard drive or SSD. And then choose your layout. So I talked about this in a previous video, but it's all about what you like. Here I have 10 mechanical drives, so the most sensible thing to do is RAID Z2, 10 wide, though I could also do RAID Z1, 5 wide. It is up to whatever kind of performance I'm going for and all of those good things. And if you had like an S-Log, spare, cache, all that stuff, you could also configure it here, but we'll just drop straight on in. And now we're going to hit create pool. So this will format these drives. So obviously if there's data on them that you need, do not do this. But now we can see right here, we have our storage pool, and we can go ahead and create our first data set within here. A data set is essentially what you actually operate on and store files on. So we'll just call this one data, and we can select what we'd like it to be. If you're using this as a standard SMB, choose SMB, and it's very nice. Now it will create an SMB share. That way you can access it through Windows File Explorer, macOS Finder. I do want to mention a couple of the advanced options here because they are quite useful. First off is quotas for the dataset and child datasets. This is where you can have a hard limit on the amount of space stored in a specific thing, and also a reservation. Next up to the useful things. First off is sync. For using SMB, I generally recommend setting sync to disabled. Setting sync to disabled on SMB share at worst costs you the last 5 seconds of files saved to the server if there's a crash. For the majority of people, that is not a big deal, and the performance benefits you get out of it are significant. So in general, sync disabled makes a lot of sense. Access time disabled off is great. Compression level. ZFS has a native built-in compression, and LZ4 is generally no-brainer. LZ4 is good at compressing data, but also good at skipping uncompressible data. So it's a great middleman if you don't really know. In general, leaving it on won't hurt anything. But if you know you want to get the most possible performance out of it, and you know you're uploading massive video files, and that's it, aka things that are already compressed and uncompressible, you can turn that off here. You can also play around with some of the other ones depending on what you've got. I've seen massive compression ratios, especially for text files and things like that. Finally, check out the record size. This can be quite an important parameter, and for new users, 128 kilobytes is a great place to start. However, if you're accessing very large files, and that's really it on this share, you can get better performance and metadata compression by going up and even bumping it up just 256 or 512. Basically, it just makes your storage a little bit more efficient because you're chunking data in larger sections. However, if you set it to 16 megabytes and you have an operation that only needs to read 100 kilobytes of a file, it actually has to load in all 16 megabytes of that data into RAM. So there's a balance there, but 128 megs is a great place to start. I'm going to set this to 256. And we're not going to touch the metadata stuff. That gets a little bit more advanced. And so now it's going to prompt us to turn on the SMB service. So we'll say yes. And now we have our first data set. Now we need a user to be able to hook up to it. So we're going to come into credentials and create a new user for ourselves. And you can see right here, you've got your additional parameters. You can set what access they can do if you want them to be able to get into TrueNAS or just SMB. And you can also create them a new group and add them to other groups. A lot of stuff you can do here, but we're just going to start keeping this super simple and just hit save now. So this will just be a basic user that only has access to what we give it. And at the same time, we'll also just go ahead and create a new group with the same credentials, groups. And this is kind of where you can assign privileges a little bit easier. And so we're just going to create this new group called data access. It's whatever you want it to be. And we're not going to give it any kind of root access or anything, but we will make it as an SMB group. This way we can just assign our privileges and permissions a little bit easier to the group, and then we add users to groups. So now I'm going to go in and add my user to the group of data access. So now whenever I set privileges on data access, my user will have access to it. And the way we do that is we come into datasets, whatever our dataset is, and we can edit our privileges right here. So we can see that it's given the group built-in users read access to it by default, which is not the best thing in the world to do. So instead, we're going to change that group from built-in users to data access. So now we are essentially telling it that anybody in data access has permission to modify and read files on there. And anybody in the admins group has full control. And so we'll just go ahead and save that. And that'll just keep it nice and easy. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and test that out really quick. So it should show up in your macOS Finder sidebar, or you can go in and just connect to it via the IP address. But we'll go ahead and test that one out. Windows has the exact same thing, should show up in Windows Network Places, or you can type in / the IP address. Now we should be able to go ahead and type in that username and password we just set up for ourselves. And just like that, we can see we've got this folder data that we have read and write access to due to the fact that we are in that data access group. I'm going to cover this much more in depth in the future, but these are the basics to just getting you up and running. So now we have SMB good, and we've also created ourselves a basic user. The next thing to go ahead and do is we want to make sure we've got our snapshot set up. This is one of those really important things that you're going to forget about, and it could very well just save you. So we're going to come into the data protection tab, create a thing called a periodic snapshot task. Snapshots essentially allow you to roll back in time. So if you've deleted the wrong file, saved over something, or gotten a virus on your computer, snapshots will let you recover from that stuff. So we're just going to set up a task to say how long we want to be able to recover files for. What we'll do is we'll say on that data set, we're going to do what's called a recursive snapshot. That means any other child data sets we put underneath there will also be done. We're going to take a snapshot. Well, let's do it every hour, starting at 6 a.m., disable taking empty snapshots, and keep them for 2 weeks. So what this will mean is, if we delete a file, we will be able to roll back that snapshot, basically grab that file out of the past for 2 weeks. Now that means that if we delete a 5 terabyte file, we will not get 5 terabytes of space back for 2 weeks, but it's well worth it. Once again, I will be covering this much more in depth in a future tutorial. So that was the basics. I want to show you a couple of things to check out here just to get started, but I'm going to cover all this much more in depth in the future. First off, there's a few ways of backing up. If you're going to another TrueNAS system, you'll want to set up a replication. If you're going to a miscellaneous cloud, you can use CloudSync. And finally, another Linux server would be rsync. Then you can also create additional shares and really customize out however you want right here. But for most people, you'll be using SMB to access files the majority of the time. And if you're running virtualization, you'll probably pick one of these 3 options, with a new one being NVMe over Fabrics, which is supposed to give insanely low latency for certain applications. You can also see all the services that are running, like I mean system and services. And right now we want to make sure that SMB starts automatically, which it is. And this is where you can control everything else. You can also manage some basic SMB configs here, though they have limited out significantly other things that you used to be able to do. If you are running macOS and you want to use this thing for something like Final Cut Pro, make sure to enable Apple SMB2/3 protocol extensions. And then also come into your actual data set and edit it to include Apple style character encoding. That is required for Final Cut Pro. So then we also want to check out and make sure something called scrubbing is going to run automatically. That's under storage, and it should be set automatically to scrub starting on Sundays with a threshold of 35 days. What this means is every week it's going to check and see if the scrub has been run the last 35 days on Sunday, and if not, it'll start it off. What a data scrub does is a data scrub makes sure that our files are consistent. So let's say we had a bad power loss or drive flipped a 1 to a 0. A data scrub will make sure that the data is clean. It'll use that extra metadata from RAID Z as well as the extra metadata it just has natively to be able to actually figure out what went wrong and fix it. So you want to make sure to run this. 35 days is more than often enough. And what this will mean is if there is an error too, it'll get resolved before it builds up to the place where there's actually an issue. And that is it for the basics. You now have a TrueNAS scale server up and running that you can start storing data on. And I'm going to cover so much more in depth all the other things you can do with it. But for now, if you have any other questions, put those down in the comments below. If you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. And also let me know any other TrueNAS scale tutorials you want me to make, because there's a whole lot of stuff out there and they're finally kind of locked in and keeping the same interface. So I'm planning on doing a significant series for the first time in a while. All right, have a good one. Bye.